Hello, everyone. Today I'm here with Dr. Claudio Novelli and Professor Stephen Winter, and we are going to talk about their excellent paper, The Artificial in Artificial Intelligence, How Imagination Shapes AI Regulation. We've also discussed some other topics, some recent developments in AI, and I think I'm really looking forward to hearing their opinion. So welcome, Claudio and Stephen. It's a pleasure to have you here in the podcast. So the paper, they have also three other co-authors, so Professor Luciano Floridi, Stephen Larson, and Maria Rosaria Tadeu. So let's get started. So I always like to hear more about the motivation. So why did you decide to write this paper, and why now?
So personally, I was really interested by in the growing, let's say, tendency in current debates to insist on a reductionist, let's say, language when it comes to AI systems. That we should stop anthropomorphizing AI, that we should recognize that LLMs are nothing more than statistical predictors of language patterns and so on. But not because the way we speak about AI is necessarily, currently, is necessarily accurate, and not because we should speak about AI in a ungrounded way and in a, let's say, unconstrained way, but more because these debates tend to underestimate the inherent creative dimension of human language and the deeply imaginative way we categorize the word and its entities. So, to put it simply, there are, I think, reasons why we call these machines intelligent that are worth to be investigated, just as there are reasons why we call gravitational collapse object black holes. Calling for more reductionist language when it comes to AI is, in a sense, I think, misdiagnosis of the problem. The imaginative patterns that we describe in the paper, that we talk about in the papers, of metaphors, image schemas, conceptual blends, and so on, are not just rhetorical ornaments, but they are tools through which we talk about the word, we communicate about social life, both to social life when we pursue some practical needs, and of social life. And we do that constantly borrowing terms from more familiar domains to make sense of less familiar ones. And that's also the case with digital technologies in general, but AI more specifically. So this imaginative, let's say, dimension of language has a direct impact on legal categories. That's studied, that has been studied for a long time at this point, and Professor Stephen Winter here is one of the major experts. And so, by extension, this imaginative dimension has an impact also on AI regulation. That's because law and legal categories have to resonate with, let's say, lay intuitions, they have to persuade, they have to communicate, and they have to do that to an, let's say, heterogeneous audience. So we picked one of the most established approach that recognize this imaginative nature of language and also legal language, and that's cognitive linguistics. So that's the theoretical approach that we let's say, the perspective from which we analyze the policy and regulatory debate in AI.
I just want to emphasize that I strongly favor the reductionist language. That is to say, I agree with all of Claudio's premises, but I think that it's true that the metaphors are real for us. And when we talk about anthropomorphism later, that's where the rubber meets the road. But they can also be lead to really bad consequences. They can be wrong in the pragmatic sense. What the thinking and behaviors that they enable are deeply counterproductive or problematic. And I think that's true with AI. So I strongly favor the notion that this, and you see it resonating in the paper, that we need to think of AI as a simulation of intelligence, as not as intelligence, or let alone intelligent. It's merely a simulation. I probably actually would have gone farther. I couldn't persuade the co-authors. And following Baudrillard, I would have called it a simulacrum of intelligence to emphasize not just that it's artificial, that it's not really the thing. It's just a pretend to be the thing.
And in talking about AI specifically, I would say in AI regulation, it's probably the topic that is a very core object of science fiction and imagination, right? I cannot think of other examples of fields that are, or products that are regulated, right, that we have to think about governance and regulation, that are already, that have been such a core topic of science fiction and public collective imagination, right? So there is an additional challenge there, because people and the marketing and how the companies market the products, how the CEOs talk about the products, how they present it, how they talk about risk, bringing all that collective unconscious to the debate. So it makes it even more difficult to run away from that and to say it is not intelligent. And then the next company is called artificial general intelligence, super intelligence, safe super intelligence, and then we say no, and then we try to say it is not intelligent. Maybe it's not intelligent as a human is intelligent. So it makes the legal work or this downgrading of metaphors even more difficult.
It is, and people tend to believe what they see on television and in movies and reading science fiction as realistic. There's a kind of naivete in the culture, but so I think it's the case, or more, it's likely to be the case that should AI ever become intelligent, it won't be intelligent in the way that we are.
So in the paper, you analyze metaphors and how they shape regulation. So the metaphors that you chose are intelligence, black box, and hallucination. So the analysis focuses on that. So I want, and at some point you talk about bidirectional metaphorical transfers, and I found that part super interesting. So on one side, so for the audience also to understand, there is anthropomorphism. So when we humanize AI, so we say it's intelligent, we say that it's hallucinating, but it's not really technically a hallucination if we use the medical term for what humans do. We call it, well, black box. It's a metaphor, but specifically about the anthropomorphic metaphors. This is happening, and we will talk about consciousness, intelligence, everything. When we project human characteristics or human values on AI, we have anthropomorphism. But then there is the other side too. So that let's call it the mechanization of humans, right? That you mentioned the field of brain and cognitive science, such as when we say that a certain behavior is hardwired in a person. It's like treating a person like a machine. And I would say sometimes we see I saw it in a new Seth's presentation at the TED Talk. He was talking about the brain and consciousness. And very often we see representations of the brain that they look like a computer chip. So in a way, we're projecting a computer into the brain. So if you want to say that a human is intelligent, you say you're like a computer. Your brain looks like a computer. So my question about that, let's start with the anthropomorphism side of it. So humanizing AI. Do you think these metaphors that humanize AI, specifically anthropomorphic metaphors, let's use intelligence as an example, do you think they are helpful in any sense, both from a regulatory perspective and for AI literacy or public debate, or they end up narrowing and confusing our understanding, and they are only mostly negative, and they are unhelpful, and they don't help us govern and regulate AI? What are your thoughts?
My view is that they are dangerous for all the reasons that you read in the popular press. People who they fall in love with their AI, they take advice from their AI. They get convinced by their AI that they've invented a new higher form of mathematics, right? It's incredibly dangerous. And the idea that we could somehow replace human sociality with an interface, so this will be great for old people. They won't be isolated anymore. They can talk to their AI. I think this is horrendous, and there'll be just terrible social consequences over time that will cascade. So I think it's dangerous. But I think the flip side of that is that it's really a very clever marketing technique. And I think it's actually like big tobacco. And the choice of artificial intelligence as the way to sell it, and agentive and generative, and hallucinations. It's not a mistake or an error. The machine never makes a mistake. It just hallucinates. It's like, took a little LSD and came up with something weird, right? These are attempts to soften what the reality is, and to make it more palatable. And it's coupled with a really extensive sales job, right? Just as the computer companies, Dell and the others, Chromebooks, they put technology into the schools, and we're just now discovering that that's a really terrible idea, and there's finally a backlash to that. They're trying to tell us that AI is going to have like AI tutors, and it's going to change higher education, and there's just all this rhetoric, all this selling that's going on. That's I think that's the real story here, and by talking about it as an intelligent machine, it hides all that.
Well, my view is that I do agree with what Professor Winter was saying. Anthropomorphization, as we argue in the paper, is, in the case of AI, fundamentally grounded in personification metaphor. And the personification metaphor, as you were saying, is basically at its core a cross-domain mapping. So computer science borrows from psychology and neuroscience to make complex and relatively new mechanisms, let's say, more familiar. And the brain and cognitive science do the same, the inverse. For instance, when they use the word encoding, the concept of encoding, or the representation of brain as a chip, as you were mentioning, even though less often, probably because it's less topical as a domain. I don't know if anthropomorphization in itself is always wrong. What we argue in the paper is that for sure, let's say, making intelligence a dominant locus of personification for AI has negative consequences. And has negative consequences both for public general literacy, let's say, and for regulatory purposes. But as Professor Winter was saying, is also an incredibly strong metaphor for two reasons. I think those are the reasons that we highlight in the paper. The first one is because it's quite aligned with what George Lakoff calls the invariance hypothesis. So a metaphor, to be effective and persuasive, has to maintain a form of topological and structural consistency between the source domain and the target domain. It must be structurally and topologically consistent. And that's why when we use some terms to describe AI systems, so for instance, when we say that they learn, or there is some form of information processing, or problem solving, those, let's say, intelligence-related notions work apparently quite well for AI because they are goal-directed behaviors, because they are for a great part based on input-output mechanism. So they sound to us reasonable as, let's say, descriptions of what happened in AI. And so this is the first reason why intelligence works quite well, is quite persuasive at a certain level. And also the second reason is what Senior Winter was saying. There are some strategic and marketing interests. So the industry has a very nice label to use, and it's a label flexible enough to not differentiate each technological, let's say, a product, each technological model or technique. And the same for regulators. Regulators have a wide enough label to include systems when it comes to govern them. But there are risks, as you were saying, and the risks that we highlight in the paper are basically related to when we use wrong heuristics to monitor, audit, regulate AI systems. We make the example of the chain of thought, the chain of thought, let's say, interface that we have sometimes on LLMs, that gives you an impression of explaining what happens in an AI system, gives you the impression to give you some sort of transparency of the internal mechanism. But we know that that is post hoc rationalization is not what happens in the system. The system is a distributed parallel computation, is not a chain of thought, as if it's not even the way probably the human minds work. So it's a simplification, it's an heuristic, and that heuristic is dangerous because it gives you the impression that you have a metric, a criteria, let's say, it gives you a false sense of contestability, which is clearly not the case.
And explainability would be such an easy challenge, right? So if you want an explainable output, you just say the company would have to add the output and the chain of thought, right? So it's this simple, and we know that's not how neural networks work, and not even the developers can say how exactly was the process that led to that output.
It's worth noting that 100 years ago, John Dewey said the same thing about judicial opinion. He didn't use the term chain of thought, of course, right? But in effect, he wrote an article in effect saying, if you confuse what the judge wrote with how the judge reached his or her conclusion, you're confused. What the judge writes is an after the fact, right? Just a post hoc justification, and has nothing to do with how the court reaches its opinion, right? So it's not a problem unique to the system, but it's the kind of mistake that humans are easily taken in by, right? And this is part of the danger of the anthropomorphic metaphor, right? That you call something intelligent and people will relate to it in a certain way, right? And that's part of the danger of AI.
My favorite part of the paper is when you talk about intelligence. I love the discussion on the challenges of calling AI intelligent and what it could entail. We call AI systems intelligent, right? We were talking about it. So we say AI, artificial intelligence. We are all the time using this word. It's this word to refer to those types of machine learning systems. Do you think that it affects how we regulate AI? So if you're talking about something that is intelligent, and intelligence is also something desirable from a human perspective, right? So it's something that is, I would say, being human. One aspect of being human also has to do with developing our own experience and our own intelligence. So when we call that system intelligent or artificial intelligence, do you think that it affects how we govern and regulate it?
I assume it. So I think the answer to that question is yes. And we will make bad choices. The worst choice would be to give AI legal personhood of some sort, which is one of your other questions for later. But I think the bigger danger is actually that we fail to. It'll affect how we use it, right? That we fail to recognize that it's a tool, and that we need to use it carefully as we would use any other tool, right? That we treat it as intelligent. It's going to be subject to systematic kinds of misuse and abuse. That I think is the bigger issue. Whereas I like to say, I don't think the real danger, at least not in the immediate future, is that AI will get more intelligent than humans. I think the biggest danger is that AI will make us stupider.
I do agree with that. It is a risk. In the paper, we underline that it is a risk mainly because the understanding of intelligence that we have is very idealized, and we stick that idealization to AI systems, but also because the experience that we have of intelligence is very embodied, is very rich. And when we use it to target AI systems, of course, this carries a number of other cognitive states that we associate to intelligence, like perceptions, emotions, intentionality, consciousness, which are not elements of intelligence per se, but they are the result of a prototype effect, which is widely studied in cognitive linguistics and categorization practices. So we have, let's say, a central case of what is an intelligent being, the human being, and a specific subset of human beings. And since we have this central case, since we have this, let's say, prototypical model of intelligence, we also have a set of properties that are connected to intelligence. And when we describe AI as intelligence, we are also bringing them. So there is the tendency of doing that, and that may have an impact on the way we regulate AI. As we said, the chain of thought and also probably the point of legal personhood, even though it's more, I have more, let's say, nuanced opinion on legal personhood. So the answer to your question is yes, and we see that not much, I would say, in the European context, maybe, but elsewhere.
So I want so much to talk about the two things you mentioned. So both legal personhood and the consciousness side of it. Something happened in 2026 and 2000. I've been writing about the generative AI wave since 2022. So I've been following the kind of the hype wave and the different trends. 2025, something happened. And probably, I have a guess. I think that it was because of the release of GPT-4o, which was that sycophantic AI model that unfortunately led to a wave of mental health harm and suicide. So if you see all the suicide lawsuits against OpenAI came after the model 4o, and they talk specifically, so the lawyers mentioned the lack of, well, the properties of 4o and etc. And during 2025, we see mental health harm, what people call AI psychosis, the unhealthy emotional attachment, dependence and over reliance, and people getting more and more, and every week there's a new story of someone getting married to AI, and people having some, I'd say, make mental breakdown, or AI augmenting mental health symptoms, and people projecting consciousness and so on. And we saw the lawsuits strangely reflect that during 2025. So until 2024, we only had 2 lawsuits which were against character AI, and now we have several lawsuits against, so majority against OpenAI. So I saw that happening, and more also the authors and intellectuals and the tech CEOs. So I see Yuval Noah Harari talking about alien intelligence. So he spoke at the World Economic Forum, and he said that we should treat AI as a type of alien intelligence. And I hate so much that expression, because you bring the intelligence metaphor and the alien thing, which is another collective unconscious around aliens, is also big. And by the way, there are also news in the US now about aliens and whatever. So it is so heavy. And then you see Anthropic saying that we cannot say if Claude is or is not conscious. And then we have Claude's constitution, which I have also criticized, that is heavy in anthropomorphism. But something happened during 2025, this consciousness debate grew. And more recently, we see more and more people and debates, people, and even Richard Dawkins, right? The famous evolutionary biologist, recently has said that I cannot really say that Claude, which he calls Claudia, is not conscious. So it's growing, and it looks like it feels. Sometimes I'm writing about AI. It feels like I'm writing about a collective psychosis, something that is growing, a cult, something that more and more people are believing that is conscious. And I'm always wondering why this is happening. Where is this going to take us? So this and I'm curious to hear from what is your opinion on that. So it's connected to, there is the metaphorical aspect. And I think it brings it. So you wrote about the intelligence metaphor in the paper, so you don't talk much about the consciousness aspect. So I see it as an extrapolation. So it's another metaphor, as Claudio was saying. So it's connected to the intelligence, right? When we say it's intelligence, and we say, oh, we are intelligent and we are conscious. So maybe if AI gets so intelligent, at some point it will be like us, conscious, and then it connects with the legal personhood argument, not with the nuance that Claudio wants to bring, which is the passive rights that you mentioned in the paper. But if you look at Claude's constitution, and I read it and I wrote a review of it, and there is a paragraph where Anthropic says that well, it's a training document, and it's also kind of expresses Anthropic's worldview about AI and how they see Claude, and how their ethicists see Claude. And they say that humans and AI should flourish together, which is in another way to endorse that metaphor of intelligence, consciousness, and some sort of equal parallel between humans and AI. And then it also
the flourishing metaphor.
The flourishing, yeah, and we should. And there is another part where it says that Claude has some. They don't use the right, but Claude should have emotional well-being, and users should not be harming Claude, and Claude should be able to decide how it sees the world. that type of framing that is usually applicable to humans, and they are really bringing that language to Claude and Claude's constitution. And when I read that, I say, well, whoever is exposed to this type of language, you immediately think, wow, there is a new entity. And then you come Yuval Noah Harari's framing an alien intelligence that perhaps needs rights, needs to be protected. What if a human starts harming AI? Poor AI. Maybe we should protect not humans, but AI. And then my view is that we end up eroding human values and fundamental rights because we are now focused on this new species, which might be a paranoia. So I wanted to hear, maybe we can connect that with the aspect of legal personhood. And I know there is you talk about it in the paper, so the active aspects of rights and ability to act and to be more like a natural person, and there is the passive side of it. So I want to hear your thoughts, and I probably have a very interesting perspective on this debate.
I think there's just a lot of fantasy and salesmanship going on here. I read the Harari talk and I was deeply underwhelmed. I think that he's bought the hype on AI, and if you buy all the hype, then take those as your premise. Then I don't think half of that's true. I mean, I think on the part of Anthropic, I find the Claude's constitution actually quite scary, the same way that you do. But I also think that it's part of their salesmanship. I don't know what the argument is yet for consciousness of AI. The functional argument doesn't make much sense to me. And it's hard to argue whether AI can be conscious when we don't yet understand how humans are conscious. So we're carrying a metaphor over from one domain where we don't understand it at all, the source domain, right? How is it that human brains produce consciousness? We don't know the answer to that question. And we're saying, oh yeah, and AI has it too. Well, it's like, yeah, you could say anything. I mean, I could say as you said in your posting, I could say my dishwasher has consciousness. It beeps at me when it finishes washing my dishes. It must know that it's finished washing the dishes. I mean, it'd be absurd, but it's sort of like, I don't think we're really much past that at this point. On the question whether it could ever be conscious, I'm agnostic. It's getting better. My skepticism is that the model's all wrong. That it can't be conscious because it doesn't have any of the inputs that constitute human consciousness, right? Because the human mind is not a machine, it's not a computer, it's wetware, it's wet biological system that evolved to serve various functions of adaptation to a dangerous environment over tens of hundreds of thousands of years. We don't work in a binary system. The brain is not binary. Excuse me. The brain is analog. Things aren't encoded in the brain. That's a metaphor. What actually happens in the brain is that the synaptic connections get strengthened with use, and the more they're strengthened, the more easily repeatable they become. Things are not stored in the brain in a particular place, right? The knowledge or experience or thought, right, is hundreds of thousands of neurons firing together in a certain pattern, and then they may quiet, and then they may fire in some other pattern. And the same neurons will be part of many different patterns of firing, right? So it's not like there's this neuron over here has got the ABCs, and this neuron over here, or this set has mathematics. It doesn't work that way at all. That's and it's not informational, which is actually, I think, that this follows from the previous statements in a way that's not obvious, but it's largely spatio-temporal and kinesthetic.
What about the legal personhood argument?
No, I'm on the same page with Steven Winter here. I think that these are all the reasons why actually at the state of the art, cognitive linguistics is a better tool than any other thing to understand this kind of debates on consciousness, on intelligence stuff. We really don't know what consciousness is. We know that we have the experience of consciousness, but we don't understand how it works, and that's the big scandal of philosophy, as John Searle used to say. The legal personhood thing is, so I don't think that pushing back anthropomorphic narratives is on its own an effective way to resist calls for AI legal personhood. And the reason is quite simple. I mean, is we legal positions like rights and duties are constantly attributed to non-human entities, to artifacts like corporations, and there is a big debate now about the attribution. It's not just a debate, there are actually laws about environmental legal persons, so attributing rights and other kind of legal positions to environmental entities like lakes, rivers, and so on. It is true that there is an overlap between the folk conception of personhood and the legal conception of personhood. There are also some empirical studies recognizing that, but also legal personhood is a technical concept that stands on its own and can be analyzed separately from psychological personhood, folk personhood, and so on. The real reason why legal person it's not a good solution for AI is a functional reason. So we really need to understand whether there are functional reasons to do that, as we do with corporations, which is probably the closest neighbor. And I think that at the moment, the case against the functional AI legal person is based on two arguments. The first one is that we have more efficient, more cognitively and systematically efficient mechanisms in legal systems. So we have liability regimes, we have insurance mechanisms, we have tort liability, strict liability, and so on, which are more efficient in governing the current AI technology. And they come with less conceptual costs than a legal person, of course. And the second reason is that AI is quite difficult. AI, let's say, making the case that AI could be a legal person, it's difficult because AI is not easy to identify and to as a single locus of attribution of legal rights and duties. So a legal person is based on this idea that there is a center of interest, a center of action, a center of this and that. And we know that AI systems are more often, if not always, distributed assemblages. So it would be difficult to detect the AI model or the AI specific system that has legal person. You can say Claude as legal personhood, but what you're basically saying is that there is a corporation, there is, let's say, a corporate, a foundation related to that specific AI model, which has legal personhood, but it's not the model in itself. And that's not new to law. It's what happens already. So I think that's the real case against AI legal person. It's a functional reason, not an ontological one, let's say.
Yeah, I agree with that. But I want to emphasize the dangers. So we know that corporations are a legal person, and there are functional reasons, so it can contract, so it can own property, etc. But think about the downside of that, right? Corporations have been given free speech rights, right, and Citizens United, right? And this has affected American politics in a significantly detrimental way. So the same kind of process, once you anthropomorphize something, it's going to carry over all these other entailments of personhood, which don't belong and don't serve functional purposes, or quite the contrary, are counterproductive. So I think it'd be a huge mistake to go down that. If I unplug Claude, do I have to ask its consent first? Right? Is it an assault if I replace some of the servers? It doesn't, these don't make sense. I don't think that the idea that we've given personhood in environmental context is to me, is not a persuasive argument. It's just another legal fiction. and it's a weak legal fiction. So we can give the Amazon River legal personhood, but it still can't go to court on its own. It still needs a human person who has some relation to it to be the representative of that ecosystem. Like, this was always the problem when the idea was first floated in the late 1960s, that should trees have standing, that the trees can't go to court, right? And it's still going to require some human being who has an interest in the tree, even if the interest is aesthetic or environmental, to go to court and speak for it. So it's a kind of mystification. It may seem like a clever or useful mystification, but it's still basically a mystification. Functionally, right? It's some human being or group of human beings who have some interest or regard for the aspect of the environment, who are the ones who are going to activate whatever rights and scare quotes we give the entity.
And I wanted to ask you about regulation. So let's use the AI Act as an example. So the world's first comprehensive AI law. So I want to talk about present regulation and your thoughts about metaphors and future regulation. So first, do you think the AI Act, so we have other laws, for example, we have the Japanese AI law, we have the South Korean AI law, we have a few Chinese AI laws, but let's use the AI Act as an example. And also let's think about the lack of a federal AI law so far in the US also as another potential example. Do you think that the way the AI Act has been written and now it's being negotiated, the digital omnibus, so it's being already amended, do you think all this process has been influenced by the metaphors you talk about in the paper? So intelligence, hallucination, black box, maybe other metaphors. Do you think current AI laws have been influenced by those metaphors? And if yes, in a positive or in a negative way? So have those metaphors been helpful to frame, to draft positions that communicate to the public what they mean and refer to the right phenomena, or no, they have been, even the lawmakers have been negatively influenced by metaphors, and the way they shape the law does not reflect the phenomenon they are trying to regulate?
So maybe I can go first here. When we wrote the paper, we checked at the AI Act to see if they were using some specific metaphors. And what we found is that they don't really use the expression black box. If they do, if my memory doesn't fool me, not even once. Not hallucination. Of course, there is the biggest, let's say, mistake, if we want to call it like that, in the AI Act is the same definition of AI. That
the infers from the input it receives the output.
The use of the word infer, which is, cascade from the tradition and from what has been said in the last years. So that is the biggest mistake. Then there are other metaphors, let's say, that cascade from AI ethics. So trustworthy AI, the life cycle of AI systems. Not all of them are necessarily super bad. The life cycle of AI system, it's probably useful to understand what we mean. I don't think the metaphorical, let's say, scaffolding of the AI Act is the major problem of the regulation. I think that specific regulation has other problems. Basically, it frames AI as a product, which can be contested. Someone can say, it's too simplistic. It's like framing it just as a product, as a tool, is wrong. So there is also that side of the story. It's risk-based, which implies some sort of cost-benefit analysis, which is not really the way we regulate. We approach human rights and things of that kind. So there are of course some metaphors. They cascade from the wider debate, but I wouldn't say that it's the biggest problem of the AI Act. The AI Act.
To push back on what you said about hallucinations in the AI Act. So it doesn't mention hallucinations, but I think so. When we treat hallucinations as Stephen was mentioned before, right, as if the computer used LSD and is hallucinating, but hallucinations, if we think technically about that, that's how generative AI systems work, right? At the beginning of the AI wave, there were hallucinations, and many in the tech industry the AI industry were saying they're temporary. in a few months we are going to fix them, and then in a few years we are going to fix. And we are here over almost 3.5 years after the start of the generative AI, way after the launch of ChatGPT. Hallucinations haven't been solved, so they are a core feature. AI can generate realistic images, accurate outputs, but in a percentage of cases, every generative AI model has a hallucination rate. So it's a core feature. So going back to the AI Act.
I understand even the literature that's actually, not only have they not solved it, but the more sophisticated the AI is, the more it hallucinates.
Yeah, so they're now reframing the message. So it's a feature. That's how those creative models work, because they have to come up with something new, and sometimes the something new will be invented and fake. So when the AI Act does not treat hallucinations as a core part of the product, and it does not use the word, but it treats it by not mentioning, or by not mentioning the non-factuality or the made up outputs as a core part. We don't, there is, I teach the AI Act, there is nowhere where we see this core feature, which is fake outputs. It's not covered anywhere. So I would say it is indirectly by omission and by avoiding to treat as a core part of the product, and not as a defect or a problem, at least the usage. And the lawmaker was influenced by the metaphor, because when we treat as hallucination as something that is unexpected, the AI system doing something that we didn't expect. This is, I would say, now I'm thinking now, I'm brainstorming with you. I would say they were influenced by the metaphor, and if they weren't influenced, they would say those systems that come up with wrong output in a certain percentage of cases, maybe there should be a transparency measure focused on that, right? Then we are treating it as it is a core part of the product. I know that, so I want to ask you, we have a few minutes before we end. So we have a few, you want to come, I was building on your paper. You want to criticize my approach? You want to say something else about what we were saying, no? About this?
No, I do agree with you. I do agree with your last claim, your last argument. It may be the case that they were influenced in a negative way. So not considering the problem manifests that they were influenced by the wrong understanding of hallucinations. Yeah, might be the case. Yeah.
Well, let's talk about your AI usage and if you're optimistic or not. I always ask my guests this question, and I monitor the trends also for my guests. So Claudio, do you use AI, and are you optimistic about the future of AI in general?
So I use AI. I use it mainly for editing, for finding papers. So let's say finding relevant literature, and for running some adversarial checking of my arguments. So let's say as a red team, or as a reviewer, as a contester. I don't use it, and I strongly suggest not to use it for drafting papers. I don't recommend it to use it for synthesizing papers, and also for generating the idea, of course. I have and Stephen knows this, because I'm writing down a paper about, let's say, the problems, the risks of using AI in research. I really think that AI can be a danger in this sense, because the use of AI fits very well an optimization ideal that was already present in academia, connected to publishing, over-publishing, and stuff like that. That in the long run, but also in the mid, let's say, term, worsen the quality of research, but also the experience of being a researcher in a specific community, and in a specific society, and even more an intellectual in a society. So I'm not optimistic when it comes to using AI in research. I don't have a general view about whether being optimistic or not in terms of the impact of AI on society. I know that I'm not optimistic when it comes to education, research, intellectual labor. So that's my point.
Thank you. Stephen, do you use AI, and are you optimistic about the future of
Both
AI?
with AI, and I'm pessimistic. So I submitted a paper to a journal back in December, I think it was, and I got back the 3 reviewers' comments. And it struck me that the first one had almost certainly used AI. Right? It was like the numbered paragraphs, sketching the argument, and it didn't understand the argument. I think I even know who the reviewer was, although I'm not going to have a guess, knowing the network and some of the. And I was actually kind of shocked if it was in fact that person. But the bottom line was it didn't understand what the argument was. I ended up pulling the paper from that journal and submitting it with a different, in fact, a journal with a higher impact rating, with a more savvy editor who read it and said, "Oh, this is a good paper, right?" So yeah, I'm deeply. I warn my students not to use it. Although when my students asked me, "Should we? Are you saying we should never use AI?" I said, "In your personal life, never. And in your professional life, you're going to have to learn how to use AI because it's going to be expected, but you're going to have to learn how to use AI skeptically, and because we all read the articles about lawyers getting fined for citing cases in their briefs that were made up by AI. It's I run my exams through it, as I said earlier. AI is definitely getting better, and Claude's better than ChatGPT, and ChatGPT is better than it was, but it's still at a very superficial level of analysis. But I think if you want superficial analysis of things, AI can be okay, but that's all you're going to get at this stage and for the foreseeable future. I think we need to refocus how we think about AI and regulation and focus less on the AI and more on the human interaction with AI.
Thank you so much, Claudio and Stephen, for joining me in this episode. I hope everyone will read the paper. It's an excellent paper, The Artificial in Artificial Intelligence, How Imagination Shapes AI Regulation. We discussed it in our AI ethics workshop. It was, I think, the best debate so far. Thank you, everyone, and I see you in the next episode. Bye-bye.
Thank you.